subsequent actions government has taken in our history are to be condemned and denounced. And I don't hold a brief in any way for the fascists. I think my work will comport with that. And if you really had read and understood Mises' book, Socialism, and his book, The Anti-Capitalist Mentality, I think you would alter the views from the ones you've expressed.
Dr. Higgs, that gentleman used the term social safety net. What does that mean to you, and do you agree with it?
It's an expression for the various forms of government assistance available, what we generally refer to as the welfare state, income supports, food stamps, housing assistance, et cetera, et cetera. There's an enormous number now of programs funded by government and managed by government available to assist the needy.
Are they necessary?
I don't think they're necessary. They certainly are necessary in the short run, which is to say if we eliminated them tonight, then tomorrow a large number of people would be in difficulty because they've become dependent on them. But they weren't necessary in the sense that had they never been created, alternative means would have been used to take care of the people who got into trouble, just as alternative means had historically been used throughout our history. People before the creation of these government measures relied on their neighbors, their relatives, their friends in the churches, in the lodges, in the labor unions, and there were thousands upon thousands of fraternal organizations in this country providing assistance to people who were unemployed or sick, or aid to the survivors when people were killed on the job, for example. So that certainly was never the case that no alternatives existed, and had the government never created these welfare state measures, then it doesn't mean that people would have starved in the streets. I don't think it would mean that even if they were all abolished tonight either, because if it did mean that, it would be a terrible statement about the kind of people we are. I think we're better than that, but we've certainly been compromised in our integrity by the existence of these government programs.
And another term that you use so that we can talk about all issues, resurgence of the warfare state. In this book, you write that, I propose that in any consideration of future defense budgetary costs, a well-founded rule of thumb is to take the Pentagon's always well-publicized basic budget total and double it.
A great deal of military spending is not put in the accounts in the Department of Defense category. And some of these elements that are placed elsewhere in the budget are quite large. Certainly, people are aware that the Energy Department is running the nuclear weapons program, but people tend to overlook that Homeland Security, which is certainly a defense function, has a separate department. Veterans Affairs, which is kind of deferred costs of operating the military, has its separate department. And an enormous factor which many people forget about is that in the past, much military spending has been paid for by borrowing money, which meant that the government had to service the debt it went into, and it's still servicing that debt today. So a great deal of the interest costs that the government now pays ought to be attributed to the fact that the government first incurred this debt for the purpose of military expenditures. And those amounts are quite large indeed. And when you add up all of these other elements of military spending that aren't officially accounted for in the Department of Defense budget, you can approximately double that DoD total. It's a rough rule of thumb. It may not be exact at any particular year, but in recent years it's been a good approximation.
Orange County, Missouri, thanks for holding. You're on with Robert Higgs.
Yeah, you know, I'm not as well educated as these other callers have been calling, but, you know, a man said one time, a man is not an island to himself. And as a civilized civilization, we would, if you didn't have a government, you just have mob rule. The strongest guy with the biggest gun would be the leader, right? And so you know, I spent 6 years in the military, you know, tried to defend this government, or did what little bit I could. And I appreciate where we live. And I'm 71 years old now, and I draw Social Security, but I paid Social Security all the time that I worked for 50 years, you know. And I don't feel it's really welfare that I'm drawing. I'm, you know, if I didn't have this income, I've saved enough. I could probably live without it. But on the same token, if I had to go out and compete with people, you know, younger than me at this stage in my life to make a living, I don't think I could, you know, really. I'd be down on the lower chain of the ladder there. See, so I think we need a little bit of government in our life, and if we didn't have it, we'd be living in cavemen's days. I'll get off here now.
Thank you, caller.
Well, I'd certainly take exception to the idea that if we didn't have government in its current form, we would have mob rule. I think everything we know about social organization argues against that. People have historically taken care of themselves in almost every respect without reliance on government. And in my view, they could take care of themselves in virtually every regard without reliance on government. They simply haven't had an opportunity to try doing so. But if you think that it's bad without government because the strong would brutalize the weak, just imagine what happens when you place enormous power in the hands of government officials. Then you can certainly expect brutalization and even mass murder eventually. One country after another has seen its government massacre its own citizens. In the 20th century, according to the compilations of Professor Rummel at Hawaii, governments killed more than 200 millions of their own citizens. This is not counting the number of people killed in wars these nations entered into, which killed tens of millions of additional persons. But governments killed hundreds of millions of their own citizens. And if that's the kind of protection that's keeping us from mob rule, I say, let's have mob rule. It's going to cause a lot fewer deaths before people decide that it doesn't make sense to run around in a mob. I think certainly your example of yourself being in trouble if the government were to remove its aid, or as you consider it, its payment that's due you, is certainly true. As I said a few minutes ago, people have come to rely on this government assistance. And if it were withdrawn suddenly, they would be in a great deal of trouble. But it wasn't necessary that they ever came to rely on it. There were alternatives. There were different ways for people to take care of themselves and to take care of others. And those other ways were voluntary and cooperative. But we need to remember that whenever we resort to government, we're resorting to the gun, because government backs up every action it takes from the time it collects its taxes to allow it to operate right on down the line of enforcing every one of its rules with the threat of violence. And all you have to do is continue to resist the government's dictation, and you'll soon enough find yourself exposed to violence, clapped in prison, or shot dead. So this is the alternative. This is the government's way. The government's way is the violent way. To my way of thinking, the private, cooperative way is so much more appealing that it makes no sense to turn to the violent way when we have an alternative available to us.
Email from A.F. Narriman out of Williamsville, New York. We started the conversation talking about fear. Would you agree that it is the opposite emotion, greed, that drives economic bubbles and busts?
I would not agree. I think every time we have a stock market bust, there's a lot of talk about greed. Every time we have some unsustainable run